Welcome everybody to another great episode of the Beyond Normal podcast. I'm excited to be here, your host, Kenny Groom. We have a very special guest. They are the founder of Divergent Ventures. Their name is B. Pagels-Minor. I'm excited for her. I am excited for them to come on stage and share their story. So without further ado, let's bring them onto the stage. This episode is brought to you in partnership with Ascentum, which is an award-winning coaching practice that helps high-performing professionals advance and achieve the promotions and pay they deserve. Ascend to powerful heights with Ascentum.
Hello. It's going so well. Also, I'm so charmed that you said "dang it" just like that. Oh, that was perfect.
I may need to figure out how to leave that in there because that is a real moment in podcast.
Because also, it's about you did exactly what you're supposed to do. When you make a mistake, you immediately corrected it and you moved on, and that's exactly how it's supposed to happen.
I appreciate that. I'm glad you can come on the platform. You have an amazing story. You spent some time in the startup world. Now you're taking on the challenge, quite the challenge that we all know in this times of venture capital. But without further ado, tell us a little bit about your story, your journey prior to founding Divergent Ventures.
Yeah, I think I'm a classic example of someone who legitimately, if you had asked me what I would do, I would tell you that I was going to be maybe an attorney or some other type of very non-risky role when I was a kid. Because, I grew up in the Mississippi, Tennessee area. So, literally it's a stone's throw between the two. You can go back and forth between the two states. And so that's kind of how my life was. We would spend the week in the city and then we would go down to the country on the weekends with our four-wheelers and all that other good stuff and get super muddy, then come back and be proper again on Monday. And growing up, my mom and my dad and all of my cousins, my aunts, uncles, they talked about being an attorney or being a doctor or being a police officer. Like that was like the pinnacle. If you got any of those types of things, you would just be set for life. And I kind of was on that path for most of my life. So, I went through, high school, worked really hard, got into Duke University, but then I actually ended up having this setback. Like I had sustained a pretty bad injury. And so then, I decided to take some time off and actually spend a year in Memphis. And then when I was applying back to colleges, my mom was like, well, what do you really want to do? And I was like, practically, I probably need to be in a place that I can afford to both work and do work that can help me do something after I graduate and also, educate me. And so that's actually how I ended up, transferring to Northwestern University. And, I tell people all the time is one of the things that actually saved my life because I actually have thyroid disease. And so at Northwestern University, I developed thyroid cancer. And so Northwestern, is one of those places that, truly Midwestern values. They were just like, well, we're going to wrap all of our services around you and make sure you're okay. Because I was an uninsured person. And so they're the ones who got me into the hospital system. The doctors actually had a car that would take me back and forth to my appointments so I could have all of my different treatments. And then they worked with my professors to help make sure that I could still graduate on time, even though I was so sick. And so that is one of those like really fundamentally game changer moments for me. Because all of a sudden, I'm this like 20-year-old who had thought about like, well, I might actually die. And if I do die, is it reasonable now to be thinking about, just being an attorney? Like, or should I be thinking about other things that I might want to do? And so that's when I started pursuing other potential career things. So for instance, consulting and all this other type of stuff. However, I still did not have any concept of technology or technology companies or how to work at them. So I went on that consulting path. But then I happened to graduate in 2008 with the largest economic downturn up into this most recent one, right? And so I actually got a job as a consultant, and then I actually got laid off like 4 months after I started. And so I was actually doing like all of this like gig work, right? So I was doing like handy person work, right? I was just doing like the craziest stuff to really just like make my life work. I was like, I don't really care. I was like, I just need to make money to make ends meet. I mean, like actually my favorite gig was actually being the barista at Teavana. So Teavana doesn't even exist anymore. Okay, so for some people, they're gonna be like, what is it? What is a Teavana? Yes, there used to be a place. It's a tea store that was in malls. Also, malls don't exist anymore. But these are tea stores in malls. You'd go there, and I was the one who would make your perfect tea. And I would just like be doing crazy infusions, right? Because like, hey, tea is like great. But it was also like the most miserable job because like when you know that you can do more, it's so difficult to deal with that. And so I ended up going to grad school, got my MBA, my MIS, and through that experience, they actually had me go to a career fair where I met a guy named Brian Littleton, who was the owner of a company called ShareSale.com, which did affiliate marketing. So now we obviously think about influencers everywhere, but back then there was a different version of influencers, and these were like mommy bloggers or people who were like sports people, and then they would put links on their website for companies. So, for instance, Target would say, hey, I want to partner with you. Can you put this link on my website? And then they would give them back a cut. And so that's the entire thing that this network did. And so I started off there as first level customer support, and then kind of worked my way up to, getting to be the agency relationship manager and kind of getting to this product space at the end of my career there. And it was really a fundamental change for me because even though I could have just kept pursuing, this like very specific path, I now understood that there was something called product management and that it could be something that's very lucrative. I still went to law school, but I am very proud to say I'm a law school dropout, although I could still finish, because as my parents tell me, I could still finish if I really wanted to. But it really was like, after I realized that technology was such a really it's just the most complex, most interesting thing for me that I personally could do because the problems are so interesting. They're so dynamic. And then at the core of everything is how do you delight and provide value to people? And that's the thing that I feel like drives me in everything that I do. And so, I spent, over a decade as a product person, right? Going through companies like Cars.com, Wyzant, Sprout Social, Apple, Netflix, building all kinds of crazy types of products, as well as building super practical ones to just help, influence decision making. And so all of it really kind of came through and kind of steeped me in this idea of what it means to build products successfully that are, both nationally admired and also can expand around the world. And so what I really tell people is I became an insight machine who also really, really has a very keen sense of what product market fit looks like. And so what do I mean by product market fit? So product market fit is simply when you know that as a company, you have a product that is desirable, that is something that your customers use in a very extreme and dynamic way. And so what does that mean? Like a great example is Twitter in the old days, which actually is starting to become Twitter now in the new days too. But Twitter in the old days when it first came up, people would use it so explosively that it would fail all the time, right? And the reason it would fail is just because they couldn't scale up their services fast enough for how people were actually using that service. And so then the last part, and this is the thing that Twitter also never figured out, so it's kind of an interesting issue that Twitter has, is that you also have to be profitable, right? And so product market fit, helping people accelerate to that is what I really started doing, on the side, and then eventually it kind of as my sole responsibility. And as I was doing that, I was working with increasingly more dynamic and interesting companies all over the South, all over the Midwest, all over the Mountain West. And I was so compelled by these leaders that I would come back to my network in California and say, hey, people with money, look at these cool companies over here that I think are going to be very, 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 amazing. They're going to make lots of money. How about you come invest? And they said no. And because they kept saying no to me, naturally the way that my personality goes, it's like, well, so what's the real problem here? And then as you start doing the research, you just realize that it's just not something. VCs just happen to not really invest in the middle America, right? Mm-hmm. And they commonly call this so for VCs who do, they say that this is the best of the rest approach. And I actually call BS on that, right? Because the simple fact is that when I ended up in Silicon Valley at Apple, I was not from California, right? I'm from Mississippi. All of my coworkers, I think I only need 3 people in a building with 1,000 people who are actually from California who are working at Apple. And so what I really realized is that what happened is that the rest of this country is so underdeveloped that all of us who are super talented are coming over to the East Coast to work because that's where really cool jobs are. But in reality, if we could actually stay at home, then Mississippi and Tennessee and Georgia and Illinois and Iowa and Nebraska and Arizona and Colorado would actually be the innovation capitals of this country. It would not be California and New York and Texas, right? And so the simple reality is it's not the best of the rest. It's just literally allowing the best to remain where they've always wanted to remain and be successful. And so that's what this venture company really came about, is to actually incentivize and create an ecosystem that allows us who are super talented to stay in our communities and create the type of innovation we need to support, sustain, and enhance the communities that we're actually from.
I appreciate that breakdown there, B. Like, you touched on a lot, right? But the journey that you've been on is, well, for one, it's unique, right? No, nobody can say that they have a story that's close to yours, right? So, like, it's in certain ways, it makes sense that you're taking on this challenge of venture capital, right? And you're investing in areas, like you said, that are just often overlooked. I want to go back to something though, because you talked about going to grad school, in law school, right?
Yeah.
So as you were going through that, your story, you touched on a couple of things where you saw, some of the opportunities to work for startups and work with these different companies. There was some value in that, right? And when we think about attorneys, we think about people in the legal profession. There's like this implicit value to society, right? In the legal profession, like that's usually like, it's something that we just assume, right? Attorneys are out here to make our legal system better, our country better. So I'm curious, like, what did you see in your interactions with these companies where you say, okay, like this is the value, like this is value to society, right? If I were to use my talents in this space here.
It's so funny. Like, so one, I think you're very nice to say that attorneys are supposed to be making the legal system better, because I think some people would argue that it's a little bit different. I think the thing is that whenever you're trying to decide on what to do, a lot of times you need to really do some introspection to figure out, is this something that only I can do? Or is this something that a million other people could do and potentially could be even more passionate and more successful at doing it? And so when I was really weighing this option between continuing to do the law school thing or going over to the startup, there are a few factors. So first of all, money is a total thing. Like, I'm not going to lie about that. I'm not going to try to pretend like I'm more noble than everyone else. And I didn't see like, oh, wait, there's actually potentially a lot more money over here with these like exits and stuff like that in some other places. So that's always going to be part of it, because you do need to think about what is the opportunity cost for whatever you're deciding to do. But the bigger thing about it is that all the problems were so complex and so different, and especially different in each company, that it's like, well, I'm going to have to learn new industries. I'm going to have to learn new languages. I'm going to have to learn new user situations. And critical thinking is perhaps the most important quality that any human can develop over time. I like to think that, you virtually only have somewhere between 20 and 25 really great years of work, right? And so what does that mean? It means that you spend like the first, anywhere from 3 to 7 years trying to work your way to the point that you can do interesting work, right? And so then you have this small period of time, so let's say that's somewhere between 10 and 20 years where you actually do interesting work that challenges you, that grows you, that makes you someone different than what you would have been if you had not done this. And then you are on the other side of it, right? Because ageism is totally a thing in industry. So unless you have your own company at a certain point, or unless you are a huge, factor in a company over a certain point, chances are you're not going to really grow your repertoire after a certain age. You have a very it's a very compacted amount of time that you have to essentially create a circumstance that you can become the best version of yourself. And so when I really looked at that, the thing about law school is, like, I can read stuff and I can critically think and I can figure out how to make things work. But when I really originally went to law school, part of my thought process is, how do I create more equity in the world, right? And so equity is not simply this idea that, like, so for instance, I defend someone who has had an injustice. It's also thinking about, like, how can I, from a strategic standpoint, for instance, help impact laws or impact the way that the judicial system in general thinks about something so that there's equity. But what I realize is that there's an economic component to that too, right? So like if you're an attorney and you want to pursue something, you need to have access to the right data so that you can, do research on that case. And I realized that I was like, well, I could go seek out those resources, or I could be a person who actually provides the resources to someone else to do such a thing, right? And that's when it really started to become a thing. I was like, well, one, I've now established that I think that many other people could do this type of law that I'm pursuing. But I don't know if there's that many people who have my capacity to do technology, because this is what the market is showing me based on what, the offers I'm getting and how much money and all this other stuff is. And I'm very highly valuable in this particular area. And perhaps I can then repurpose some of that money and put it back to those people who are going to need that in order to actually create the equity that I was actually looking for to be there. And so that's the thing that I really kind of looked at. So it was really more of a waiting game, right? Because almost everything, I think you have to have this, like, so one, as an individual, you are the lead in your story, right? So naturally you have a selfish view. You're like, okay, if I have to do all these things, I'm the person, like, blah, 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 blah. And so sometimes you have to take a step back and say, okay, if I was a supporting actor in this other person's story, would this story be more compelling? And what I often found when I was trying to like figure some of these things out, I was like, actually, I'm a much better supporting actor over here. And then I just kept waiting until I found the lead story for myself.
That's powerful. So throughout your career, I'm curious, like going back to your time prior to you starting the venture company, Divergent Ventures, did you enjoy managing people, being the leader of folks?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So product management is kind of a double-sided thing. So sometimes you are a manager of people, sometimes you're a manager of a product, sometimes you're a manager of teams of people who have to come to decision making. So there's like various layers to that. And what I will tell you is I absolutely loved my entire career helping people be a better version of themselves, right? And so what that means is really when you think about really great product people, they imbue everyone that they meet with product thinking. So product thinking is this very simple concept. And what it is let's say a customer service person would come to me and say, hey, B, we're getting a lot of customer complaints about this report. I think we should fix it. I might go back to them and say, okay, well, what were the complaints? And they were like, well, it just doesn't work. I was like, okay, can you do me a favor? Go back over there and ask them what outcome they were looking for when they were looking at those reports. So then we can actually determine if it's the reports that's broken or if it's our intention that we have for our report is different than intention that people are looking for. Right. And so you're creating someone who now more dynamically, as they have conversations with customers, more dynamically, even when they're at home. Like, I tell my wife, actually, if my wife were here, she would say, B just thinks like a product person. And then because I'm married to her, she's like, I think more like a product person too, because that's the way you operate. And so imbuing people with that ability to create circumstances for exponential growth for themselves and for the product is my absolute favorite part of the work that I did. Now, having said that, what I will say is the thing about product teams is that sometimes you just get maxed out on the product. You're like, okay, I've been working on this product for XYZ period of time. You're just like, I'm good on it. Like I've done enough. I've learned enough. I need a new problem to solve. And so that's definitely where I was towards the end of my, towards the point that I was trying to decide if I wanted to open this venture firm or not. I was like, well, I'm not sure if there's a product right now that really is so compelling to me that I really want to go back into a place and do that. But what was really interesting to me is whether I could take many of the principles I've learned in my product career and actually implement them at scale and add a check to that by supporting dynamic founders who I think have a exponential likelihood to not only achieve product market fit, but to be, very, innovative, game-changing products. And so that's really what the difference was for me. It's, I can take what I love most about what I've done and implement it in a way that could be really, really, really foundationally amazing for others.
I love that. I love that so much. The way that you're able to connect these stories, maybe it is your product background. I don't know, but it just seems like it flows.
I would tell people, I would say, I'm from Mississippi, we storytellers, have you ever met a Southerner who couldn't put some words together? And you're just like, but wait, is this true or is this fiction? Just because, but that's one of the things, again, this is why I love being Southern. It just changes. there's so much about culture, the way that you grow up, the way that you operate. And then obviously you also add in there being Black. And it's just a way, there's a rhythm to it. And, I remember when I would just sit on the couch and watch my family members, relate things. And I would always just be like, it's like, it felt like music, right? It's like, and the one uncle would be jazz, the auntie would be gospel, the cousin over here with that new R&B, and then the really young cousin was the hip hop. And so it took us a while to get to the right beat on that one. But it was just like this amazing experience just observing them. And so a lot of times, when people ask me, because like people assume that this is me, I was like, no, I'm just very fortunate to be around so many people who are so dynamic. And all I tried to do is kind of hit their level when it came to how they explained and brought people into the conversation.
So I want to take it home. Let's go back to home where you grew up. Obviously, growing up in the South, like, do you feel like, being in the South? I'm in the South myself. I'm in the city, right? So I feel like I'm a little sheltered sometimes because I don't get like the full experience of living in a state, in a southern state. So I'm curious, like, just growing up, do you feel like your environment allowed you to be your full self? Or do you feel like that's something where, obviously you've moved around, you've been different places. Like, did you have to go to these different places to be comfortable in your own skin?
It's so interesting. So one of the things I tell people most, like, for instance, even like my little cousins, one of the first things I tell them is go somewhere else to go to college, right? Go somewhere else, right? Because the number one thing I've learned is that it is dramatically different from region to region. And that's actually a really cool thing. And then if you add on that going internationally, then they're just like, wow, it's super dramatically different, even from an international perspective. And then I will say, for me, like, so for instance, most people say, well, you're trans, non-binary, lesbian, like, so you must have really struggled in the South. But the thing is, it didn't even occur to me that gay people or trans people existed when I was growing up, right? Because there weren't even media representations that I could refer to as, a teenager to even give me this idea. So I didn't feel uncomfortable in that way. I actually felt more uncomfortable because I was really smart. And like, I didn't speak like other people in my community. And so I actually asked my mom, I was like, why don't I have as much of a Southern accent as everyone else? And she was like, I really feel like you watch TV and you just tried to sound like the people on TV. Like, that's just who you were. Like, that's who, like, you wanted to talk to them. And it really did. That was actually more ostracizing for me than whether I like had to, like, say I played sports for most of my life. So I would be in like more like masculine looking clothes. And so like they would dog me a little bit about that, but they were really just like, why you talk white? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know why I talk like this. I just talk the way that I do. And so, that was a little bit more of a struggle for me than anything else. But then, I started traveling, right? And so you end up, you're going to North Carolina, you go to New York, you go to DC, you go to Chicago, and you find out actually I'm just a blurred, right? A Black nerd. And there's actually a whole bunch of us. Right. I'm not that exceptional at all, actually. Right. Because that's another concept that used to happen. Right. Like, cause like there's this like, it's like Black exceptionalism. It's like this small percentage of Black people are really, really amazing. And no. Actually, all Black people are really, really freaking amazing. Right. Mm-hmm. It just so happens that, we've decided that because some people act or participate in life in one way, that they somehow are a bad representation of Blackness. But the thing is, Blackness is just beautiful and everyone should represent Blackness in the way that makes sense for them. And so I say that because, the thing that I actually find to be the most disturbing about kind of coming out, especially if you're kind of identified as being smart or you have high potential, is that they never wanted me to fail, right? Like, it was like, no, you have to be perfect. And that desire to be perfect was much more damaging than if someone had said, well, you're a lesbian and I think that's weird, right? It's like that actually, like someone hating me, like being homophobic would have probably been more acceptable than how much pressure I felt that was on my shoulders because somehow I had to be successful, because if I didn't, I would fail the whole family. Or actually worse, because the whole church actually put the money together to give me stuff to go to college. So it's like, I'm gonna fail the whole church if I don't succeed. Like, this is a lot of pressure to put on a 17-year-old, right?
They brought the Lord into it.
Exactly. I was like, you don't need to pray over me because I'm a study, but I can't guarantee an A. I can't do that, right? So that's the thing. So I think that's the thing. Like I would say that that's the most harmful thing that it happens in every community because again, by the time I got to college, my friend from DC, she was like, yep, it was the same. I feel the same way. My friend from Philly, I feel the same exact way. Like I'm the one who's supposed to be successful because I was the smarter one in my community, and I have all this pressure on me. So that's the thing. I would encourage people to remember again, everyone has potential to be amazing. We don't know who's going to have $1 million idea, $1 billion idea. I mean, look at Jay-Z. I'm pretty sure people in his community were just like, that dude going to end up in jail, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they probably didn't invest nearly as much time and energy as they probably should have invested in him, right? Because they didn't see his potential. And the reality is, you don't know. Like everyone has so much potential, and so until someone is dead, you have no idea who they will be, or actually who they will be the parent of. Like who they will help out. I was actually on the drive back over here, and there's a young woman. You could tell she recently became unhoused. And I was just like, her spirit feels so full though. Like I could tell. And I was like, so I stopped and I was like, what's up? Like, blah, 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 blah. And I gave her some cash, but I was like, dude, I was like, you got this. I was like, you're light, like you have so much light. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can never, never, never discount how much potential and how much capacity for amazingness a person can have. It's the worst thing we could possibly do to them.
Yeah, I love that. And just going back to your point earlier around you don't know what position you will play in somebody else's story. So that I think that ties in, really good. And I'm curious, all right, I want you to wear your founder hat now. Speaking about, you've touched on it quite a bit throughout the conversation around, embracing your strengths, embracing who you are, and finding the areas where you can add the most value. A lot of times as a founder starting something new, you're not the best at stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just natural, right? You're not going to, most of the time, we're not aliens, right? So we're not going to be great at every aspect of running a business. What's an area of the business, Divergent Ventures, where you've had to, find the right person to play the right role in your story as you build out the company? I'm curious, what's the area of the business that you can point
So
out?
interesting, right? Because being a founder in 2023 is different than being a founder in like 2018 and 2012 and all this other stuff. So actually, there's two things I thought of. I was like, first and foremost, I was like, I'm gonna have to productize as much of this as possible, right? And so what does that look like? So examples are, which services can I piece together to kind of automate a certain workflow, for instance, like, from onboarding, onboarding LPs. Like, so LPs are limited partners in the fund, so people who are actually giving me their money to invest on their behalf, all the way to how do I figure out how to do taxes, right? So those types of things, it's like, okay, this is very clear. Like there should be products that do taxes, there should be products that do onboarding, there's probably products that do finance. Right. So those types of things, like, it's even beyond like, how do you find the right person? It's which things can you automate and make super easy and simple to do? Because, my first thing is like, how do I de-risk mistakes, right? Because I'm dealing with finance. And so, a decimal point in the wrong place. And then all of a sudden a deal goes from this that's great to something that's super terrible, right? And so, that thing is very interesting. Also like law firms, I interviewed a dozen law firms to figure out which one I thought was like the best, that had the highest quality, that I thought would be a great partner to me. Because, I understand that, again, having my law school background too, it's like, I'm going to have a problem that comes up. I need to just be able to call someone in 2 seconds. So then the things that I was like, so now that I understand what I could actually buy and I can just, use tooling for, the real question became, well, which services, which attributes do I not have? So even though I've done lots of finance deals, but as an investor, I've looked at many different deals, like finance is, even if I wanted to be great at it, it's just not something I'm that interested in. Right. I want to think about the thing I'm great at, which is figuring out what company I think has great product market fit, how to make sure you find the right founder, and you have a lot of a lot of ability to coach and make that person super successful. And so then, so the first things first was, okay, let me look for someone who's going to be a great finance partner, right? So someone who really lives and breathes that and who's going to get excited about it. The second thing I was thinking, I was like, well, how can I find a process person? So again, even though I'm really good at creating processes, I actually kind of hate it. Like I I really like to do the other stuff that's more fun, that's more dynamic, that changes my mind a little bit more. And so I was like, well, let me go find a process person. So, for instance, my chief of staff, his background, he has a degree in engineering, right? And he does that type of work every single day. And within like the first 24 hours of hiring him, he's like, well, can we do these 15 projects? I was like, you can go do whatever you want to do. I was like, this is perfect. You go do it. And so that's the thing. You figure out, like, what do I love to do? So again, for everything you do in life, what is the thing that solely I'm the best at doing? And then everything else, you find someone else who can do it for you.
That's a bar. That is, you touched on accounting, taxes. We had a founder up here last season, compliant, and they automate that kind of stuff and the calendars and stuff like that. I get anxiety when I have to do LLC forms and owing the government money. Like, makes me very tense.
Yeah, I mean, make everyone tense.
Yes, and so that founder that we had on, Shiloh, she's probably forgotten more stuff than I'll ever learn about accounting and taxes. Just hearing the examples, like you said, there's people out here who are amazing. There's people out here who enjoy taxes. They enjoy the process of it, figuring out how to save money, how to, maximize, your dollars. Why not let them do that? Obviously there's a cost to having people in these positions, right? You got to pay people what they're worth. But the time it saves you touched on that, just the time it allows you to do what you enjoy and what you're good at. It's priceless. I know we can put dollar signs on some of this stuff, but it really is priceless once you open your calendar up to do what you really want to do.
Yeah, 100% to that. And the other thing about it too, so just one thing I would say, for my first hires, the other thing I thought about is like, one of the things I thought was strange when I was first really coming out of school and really trying to get jobs. So there's this thing called equity in a company, right? And I thought it was so fascinating how many people would not quantify equity for people. So it's like, I'm employee number 12, and you don't want to give me a piece of your company when I'm going to be one of the most important factors to your success. That seems very strange and very selfish. And so the second part is, even if you're just starting out and you don't have a lot of budget, reward your employees with equity, reward your employees with being part owners of the company, and then give them the power to do what they're best at, right? Because that's another part of this idea of, it's not enough to have people work for you. You need to have people who are working for themselves. And that's and it's through you, because they know, if I built this company to $1 million or $2 million or $10 million or $1 billion, I got this chunk here. And so it's a different level of passion. It's a different level of ownership. And again, it still makes your life so much easier, because you don't have to go follow up and do anything with those people, because they're like, no, I got this because my money involved here too. And I'm like, all right, cool. I was like, I'm sorry, boss. You go do your thing. It's like, you go do what you want to do, and I'm going to sit over here and just continue to root you on over here.
Yeah, money talk. So if you can elaborate a little bit around the obviously venture capital, you're looking to invest money in businesses and startups. What are the, obviously we've narrowed down the regions, but I'm curious, what are some of the other qualifications or categories where you're looking to invest in these businesses?
Yeah, so I'm generally vertical agnostic. And so what that means is that I'm really, really, especially when, so one of the pieces of advice I've got from actually a few different people is that when you're investing in a region that is generally underdeveloped, it's better to be agnostic, because you want to start to create the ecosystem and then figure out exactly where the talent is leading, right? So it makes more sense to kind of figure out, to engender kind of like that igniting force, so then you can actually kind of see what sticks a little bit. So that's a little bit for the agnostic part. So I always like to clarify that, because people think it's, well, you just don't want to choose. It's like, no, I'm taking a thoughtful approach to see how we can actually engender a certain types of things. Like, for instance, in the South, I would expect, if all things being equal, why wouldn't healthcare and climate tech and all those things be the most important things to Southerners, right? Because, the South has had tornadoes, hurricanes, this is a big issue. In the Midwest, logistics, of course, it's something that had, a lot of the Midwest has a lot of those types of things, but there's also agriculture, right? And so these are things that you kind of think about, naturally, this is what I would hope would be in these areas. But the reality is they may not have all the resources they need to actually build companies in those particular industries right now. So we'll start off with like doing an investigation, figuring out where the most talented, people are, and then partnering with those people to figure out what they actually want to do. And so sometimes those will be people who already have companies that are in existence, or sometimes you'll be in a situation where you'll find really great founders and you can work with them to build up something. But then taking a step back, what does a great founder look like to me? Right? Because that's really what it is. Like all things being equal, I don't care what company it is. I don't care how great the idea is. I don't care how much money they've made. At the end, you're just like, let me look at this person in front of me, and do I think this person is going to make me money? And so the founder is the most important part of this process to me. And so I'm looking for people that are highly coachable, because again, that's what I figured out in my career. One, I'm best at. I'm really great at coaching people, but if they're also highly coachable, they're very humble. That means they're going to listen to people. That means they're going to be, they're going to soak up information, and they won't be beholden to an idea if it's not going to work, right? So it's always very fascinating, right? Because the companies that think about, how do I phase out my current product for the next best idea kind of thought process. I also really like capital efficient founders, right? So I always thought it was very strange, and I've worked at many of these companies actually, that they get some money and then their run rate of like money spending is crazy. So run rate is when it's essentially how much money a company spends each month. And then so most people will say how much run rate, like how much run would this give you if we give you XYZ amount of money? And they'll say, my run rate is like, $1 million a month. So if you give me $12 million, I'll have 12 months of runway, right? And so the thing is that, I like, for instance, the Stripe founder. So Stripe has raised a crap ton of money, but they've actually been super capital efficient. So it's something that they've only like used up like 25 or 30% of the money that they've raised, and they've still decided not to do an IPO. And in fact, they're going to raise more money to give out to basically compensate those employees whose stock options are going to lapse. And again, so that's a great leader who cares about their team, who's making sure that they get paid. So that I love that. But then he's also like, well, what do I need to do to make sure I don't have to make a poor choice potentially and go IPO? Well, I'm going to raise more money, and because I'm so capital efficient, I'm confident I can do that, right? And I think that that's the other part of it, because the simple fact is that, because of the regions that I'm investing in, there isn't as much VC dollars. So anyone I'm investing in needs to understand that you may not get that much more funding than what I'm going to give you. And so whatever I give you has to last you for an entire, a long period of time. And so if they aren't thinking through that capital efficient lens, they're going to run out of money, and then I'm not going to get a return on my investment, right? And so that's a big problem. And then the last thing is that I am really increasingly bullish on M&A. So M&A is mergers and acquisitions. And so what that means is looking at companies that are going to have a high likelihood of being acquired. And that could be acquired by other large corporations, or maybe it's like a great target for a private equity firm who might want to take it and make it a part of their portfolio of companies. And so again, the idea being that I don't think IPOs will be as interesting, because there's so many of the IPOs that have happened recently have done very poorly. And so again, IPOs and initial public offerings is the very first time any company goes onto the stock market. And so sometimes that's NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, but also there's many other stock exchanges in the world. So it's any time they IPO across any of these exchanges. And so I think that it's increasingly unlikely for companies to be able to do this successfully. And so the number one way to exit is through an M&A action, right? And M&A is usually something that's a highly collaborative, partnership-driven role, right? Like in order to do that, you have to be the type of leader that goes out and creates friends. Like you have to be, and it's not the popular kid, right? Because the popular kid doesn't always actually have friends. They just have followers. I'm talking about the person who has friends, right? The people who are like, no, I think your idea is great, and I want to invest in you. Like a great example is like the OpenAI and Microsoft relationship, right? OpenAI is a company that from day one had a lot of acquisition potential because companies like Microsoft were some of the original investors. And so again, so you're looking for companies that have that mindset, have that ability to be super collaborative. And then if that works, then it de-risks my potential investment, right? Because I can maybe potentially put in funds for lower multiples and then have higher exit numbers because it's a de-risk portfolio. So in the end, it's about people who are cool, who are friendly, who are thoughtful, who care about their employees, who care about what it looks like to return capital to people. And you can tell pretty quickly the difference between people that are great founders that would be great for my portfolio, and then other folks as well.
Yeah, I like how you brought in the mergers and acquisitions. I'm curious, like your thoughts. There's been a couple Black brands that have sold to bigger brands that are worldwide, and like you said, there's that partnership there. We know the famous ones like a Rihanna and stuff like that, but then there's also some other cool brands that have sold recently. I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on founders that are open to that idea of, ultimately having their brand be a part of a bigger conglomerate?
So are you really asking, like, is there a responsibility for a Black brand to potentially not choose to be a part of a conglomerate? Or are you asking something else?
Well, you're touching on it. I think there has been some backlash on certain outlets right around, well, why are you selling? Right. But it's like, like,
yeah.
I'm getting this money, and then I also get to add value within like a a bigger entity. In addition to that, taking my money and then investing it in to back into our communities, right, as an option. So I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on founders that are taking that route and they're not, they're okay with getting, some form of a payout versus saying I need to hit unicorn status?
Yeah, so first of all, I don't think anyone should ever chase unicorn status, right? Because majority of companies aren't going to accomplish it. And there's many, many, many millions of companies that have existed that are exceptionally great companies that employ thousands of people and put millions or billions of dollars over time into their communities and create really great economic opportunity in their communities. So I don't think unicorn status makes sense. Now, having said that, for Black-owned companies, I think there's a couple different things. A lot of the companies that have, sold recently that there's been backlash over, they've actually been doing this for years. So this isn't like a 1 or 2 or 5 or like this. They've been on this grind for a very, very, very long time. And I'm not sure if it's fair to require someone to own a company for their entire life when it is tiring, right? Like, maybe they want to sell the company because they want to be able to take a vacation when they want to take a vacation. And that's kind of okay. Or maybe they want to sell the company because they started when they were much younger and now they're married with a family and they realize, like, I can't be able to be as effective at this company if I also want to be a great parent. And so I don't begrudge anyone for making the personal decision to do that. Now, then the second part of this is like, is it okay to sell it to a large conglomerate? Well, my better question would be, is it okay for them to take a large pay cut not to? Right? I'm not sure it's anyone's responsibility to take less than what they potentially could get from something to maintain a certain type of ownership or a certain characteristic of the type of owner. Now, could they create some synergistic, contract language or something like that says, you can only do this or you have to be this type of behavior? I don't know. Like, maybe that's the strategy. But the bigger thing is that I remember when I really, did my own first thing. I was like, well, if this hits, I'm going to sell it and I'm going to do something bigger the next time. And so sometimes I think that's also part of it. It's like, let me go ahead and sell this, take a year or two off, get my, energy back, and I'm going to build something bigger and better because now I know more. And the thing is that that's what white folks do all the time. Honestly, like, that's what they do. Like, they sell their company and then they go do something that's even better for their second or their third or fourth company. And there's no requirement for them to sell it to another white person, right? Like that's not how they talk about it. They say, I sold it for what I got. I got the best possible deal I could. Because the other thing is that most of these companies have some kind of shareholder or stakeholder who is looking for some kind of return. And so it's every single founder's responsibility, fiduciary responsibility, to generate the best possible return for the people who invested in them. So I would actually say that, let's pretend, like I think Bevel's a great example because I know people were really mad about Bevel.
Mm-hmm.
If he had decided to sell something for something cheaper, or let's say if he even just tried to not sell at all, like he potentially could have had all of his shareholders at his door suing him, saying that you aren't doing your fiduciary responsibility. So first and foremost, I think people need to check a little bit the facts, because a lot of times these people aren't the majority owner necessarily of their companies. Like they have responsibilities to the people who invested, and they're supposed to generate a certain type of return for those people. And so there's legal constraints there, right? That could really say that maybe they didn't even have a choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like, this is the situation they're in. I would argue that the better strategy is, instead of being upset with them, is how can we pull our money together so that we have enough money so that we could be the best offer for that brand.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we have large venture firms, PE firms who are Black owned, Black run, and we have the economic capacity to buy the company so that we can stay in our communities. That's the real strategy. Right. And maybe those folks will be some of the investors, and along with myself, as I hit my millions with this venture firm, and then we will become that. And then perhaps we can change the dynamic there, because this is really more of a long-term strategy about how to build wealth in our community. And sometimes we have to make sacrifices along the way to get there.
I appreciate you positioning it the right way, that way. And you touched on it. In a lot of instances in our communities, this is like the first time that a lot of these things have happened. So obviously there's like the cooler talk. We're on Twitter, we're on these different channels, and we're like having like barbershop talk about it. But like these are things that should still be celebrated. And then, like you said, it'd be powerful if the resources are pooled, and then we can find ways to keep it in house. But if not, you can't really fault a founder for putting in that time and energy and saying, "Hey, I want to cash out." To your point, life changes. You have kids, you have a family. Like vacations are amazing if you can take them. Sleeping in is amazing. I'm a big proponent of getting your sleep now, and founder life isn't always conducive to doing some of those things.
Yeah. Well, also neither is baby life, as I most recently know. So.
Oh yes, you said baby life, right?
Yes.
Yes, baby life is no joke. So that is like a whole nother. That could be like a whole podcast episode alone. I feel like just being a founder that's a parent. Oh my gosh, there's not enough resources for them. So go ahead.
I said actual facts.
Yes. One thing I wanted to touch on, I'm throwing this in there. You're a podcaster as well. The Drops podcast. You want to tell us a little bit about that? I feel like that fits somewhere into what you're doing now with the Divergent Ventures.
Yeah. So, when I first was kind of like contemplating going back into the workforce after having a kid in 2021, I already had this relationship with my co-host Tam Denier. And so, we would always have these really crazy conversations about product and product market fit and all this other type of stuff. And at some point we were just like, we should actually just record this. We should record it. We should make it happen. It's going to be great. And that's exactly what happened. And, it really was it just grew out of this desire because, between the two of us, we have over 30 years of, business, technology, product experience. And so we just wanted to talk about the things that we discovered in our own companies that we work with, but then also the things that we would observe. And the thing about it is, in some ways, really great product leaders are just really, like I said, they're just insight engines, right? That's all they're doing. They're just looking at things and they're deriving insights. They make a hypothesis, they experiment, and then that becomes the new future, the new direction of a product. And we just decided to say that and record those insights that we might have across so many different companies and industries and put it in one place, and that's a podcast.
It's that simple. Like the way you just broke that down, I think a lot of people, they think a podcast can be, this really big production. We've seen some, there's some nice podcasts out there. They have full studios, but it starts with just having a conversation and hitting that record button. And so I appreciate you so much for breaking it down that way. Podcast life forever. We're a podcast ourselves, right? And so it's always great to see folks leveraging that medium, right? That channel to get the message out. We'll make sure that we put that in the descriptions for folks to tap in with that as well.
Yes.
So all right, we're wrapping up here. Lastly, we want to throw it to you. Let folks know how they can connect with Divergent Ventures. And stay in tune with what's coming up this year and beyond, because I know there's some amazing things coming up for you and your team.
Yeah. So first and foremost, it's divergentventures.com. My wife likes to say without the vowels is the best way to think about divergent. So, just remove the vowels and you'll have it. She's also a marketer, so that's exactly why this name is the way that it is. And so the things that I think about when Divergent Ventures. So first and foremost, we create a lot of blog content that just tries to demystify, venture capital, how it works and things like that. So I really highly invite people to go to blog.divergentventures.com to get some of that content to learn a little bit more about venture capital, because I believe that everyone has a potential to be in this space. And it's something that the more of us that there are, the higher the likelihood that we will have these amazing outcomes and again, be able to keep our brands in our communities. But then the second part of that is, obviously, I'm always looking for really interesting, cool founders, right? So if you're a founder, feel free to also go to the website. If you scroll down to the bottom, there's a founder submission link. Feel free to shoot your shot and tell us a little bit about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And, we can't obviously invest in every company, but I do try to respond and tell people what I thought or what I didn't think, and maybe even, shepherd them over to some other resource or someone else who can talk a little bit about how to make them better or how to make them successful.
Shout out to your wife who's wearing the marketing hat, because as soon as I saw the name, it made perfect sense to me. I didn't mess it up. Like you said, taking out those vowels. I don't know why it still makes sense, but it does. So shout out to her as well.
Well, so I feel like it's like those Instagram posts where someone will write out like some kind of all this different, like, the IYK, and then like blah, 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 blah. I just feel like we just know, like, we are the millennial, Gen Z, Gen Alpha people. And so we're like, no, we know exactly what you meant. So.
Yes. No, shout out to her. Lastly, just in closing, what do you want to leave our listeners with? We've had an amazing conversation breaking down your story. Like you said, in the South, Mississippi, all these different places that you've been, your time in tech, and now you're taking on that challenge of venture capital. This is not an easy challenge, but, what do you want to leave our guests with?
Yeah. So, a lot of people ask me, like, why do you do this? Or how did you know to do this? Or should you do? All these different types of things. The simple fact is the number one thing that I think that you can cultivate to allow you to do anything possible is curiosity. So, be curious. I'm one of those people, if I hear something, I see something, I write it down, I take note, I look it up later, and I learn about it. And so, whether it goes from figuring out how to go to college, because I didn't really have examples, so I had to figure out how to go to college. I had to figure out how to go to grad school. I had to figure out how to get into tech. I had to figure out what tech was. I had to figure out what product management was, and I had to figure out what venture capital is. And so each one of those opportunities to learn more has been some of the greatest choices I've ever made in my life. And it really has been all the difference between, me being that kid from the dirt roads of Mississippi to now being this really weird finance venture capitalist person who lives in LA, and looks out into the freaking mountains and stuff every day. Whoever would have thought? So.
That's an excellent way to end the episode. Again, I appreciate you for being a guest. I appreciate you for taking on the challenge of venture capital, especially when it comes to Black founders. We definitely need more people in your position who can be, pass the mic or be the one on the microphone speaking on behalf of some of these amazing founders. Definitely looking forward to seeing what your team comes up with. Amazing ideas, amazing partnerships that happen in 2023 and beyond. And to our listeners, thanks again for tuning in to another great episode of the Beyond Normal podcast.